The war dramatically affected where Americans lived and worked. 16 million soldiers, sailors, and Marines were deployed throughout the country and around the world. In addition, 15 million civilians, or 1 in 8 Americans, relocated between 1941 and 1945. They included Midwestern farmhands heading to the factories of Detroit and Chicago, black sharecroppers going north for war work, Mexican nationals recruited back into the Southwest after a decade of expulsion, Mexican Americans leaving the rural Southwest for cities like Los Angeles, women shifting from unpaid domestic work to paid employment, and, of course, 100,000 Japanese Americans forcibly relocated to the West Coast to desert internment camps. The warm coastal states of the South, Southwest, and West Coast, later called the Sun Belt, grew rapidly during the 1940s. As one contemporary put it, quote, "It was as if someone had tilted the country so that people, money, and soldiers all spilled west," end quote. The federal government invested $2 billion in developing Western infrastructure such as roads and water projects, and spent at least $30 billion purchasing products from the region. 2 million war workers moved to California alone between 1942 and 1945, and the state grew by 72% by the end of the decade. During the war, the number of women working for wages increased from 12 to about 19 million. Previously, aside from being teachers and nurses, women worked mostly in service jobs segregated along gender and racial lines. These included restaurant and secretarial work, domestic employment, and jobs in textile mills. In 1941, half of the women who worked were single. Only about 15% of married women worked outside the home. Wartime labor shortages changed public policy and attitudes towards women in the workplace, especially in jobs traditionally held by men in shipyards, on assembly lines, and in aircraft factories.
Among our young unmarried women and among older women whose children are grown, we have a large reserve. They discover that factory work is usually no more difficult than housework. Employers find that women can do many jobs as well as men, some jobs better. Tens of thousands of women are already at work in aircraft. More are being added as fast as they apply. This solves the breadwinning problem for many families whose men are at war. The government's policy is that women should get the same pay that men get for similar work. Where necessary, machinery is adapted for women's use. When a hand drill weighs heavily on feminine muscles, the lazy arm drill is introduced to take off the strain. When married women with small children have to take jobs, everything possible will be done to provide day care for the children.
The Office of War Information released radio plays, films, and posters that encourage women to join the industrial workforce. Before the war, 80% of the public told pollsters they disapproved of wives working outside the home. By 1942, 80% said they approved. Women of color faced special obstacles when they sought defense work. To get jobs, they frequently staged protests at plant gates and filed discrimination complaints with the federal government. In the Southwest, Mexican-American women struggled to gain access to aircraft building jobs in Southern California, but they often could only find work in garment trades. American Indian women who moved from reservations to western cities found jobs primarily in service work. Even in many defense plants, women continued to be assigned to gender-segregated tasks, to receive lower wages than men for similar work, and often to go without critical support services such as daycare for their children. Business and political leaders frequently disparaged complaints by women and urged them to think of factory work as a temporary status. They should keep their focus on the home and prepare to resume their lives as homemakers and mothers when the war ended.
In our day, certain economic truths have become accepted as self-evident. A second Bill of Rights, under which a new basis of security and prosperity can be established for all, regardless of station or race or creed. Among these are the right to a useful and remunerative job, the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation, the right of every farmer raise and sell his products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living. The right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom, freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad. The right of every family to a decent home, the right to adequate medical care, and the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. The right to adequate protection from the economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment. The right to a good education. All of these rights spell security. And after this war is won, we must be prepared to move forward in the implementation of these rights to new goals of human happiness and well-being. For unless there is security here at home, there cannot be lasting peace in the world.
Although constrained by the power of congressional conservatism, President Roosevelt remained committed to expanding liberty and security for all Americans. On January 11, 1944, he broadcast a State of the Union speech that called for a second Bill of Rights, an economic Bill of Rights that would guarantee every citizen a job, a living wage, decent housing, adequate medical care, educational opportunity, and protection against unemployment in post-war America. But except for a Veterans Aid Program, Congress balked. In the summer of 1944, a coalition of liberal Democrats and conservative Republicans passed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, or GI Bill of Rights. Initially conceived as a simple pension program, the GI Bill morphed into the last major piece of New Deal legislation. Under pressure from both veterans groups and social liberals, Congress agreed to provide returning servicemen unemployment benefits, medical coverage, home mortgage guarantees, small business loans, hiring preferences for government jobs, and extremely generous education benefits. Since the law covered 16 million veterans and, indirectly, their spouses and families, it became after 1945 the biggest, longest-running, and perhaps most successful New Deal social program.